Thank you for hitting play, and welcome to the series we're calling Data Pioneers. We're bringing together the brightest minds in the healthcare industry, supporting the transition to value-based care. We'll be highlighting the best practices, tools, lessons, and advice with a focus on data and analytics. I'm your host, Rich Waller from WellStack, and we're very excited to have you join us today.
In this episode of Data Pioneers, join Dr. Thomas Powell, the CMIO at Aspirus, as he dives into the exciting world of AI in healthcare. He'll unpack a mix of opportunities and hurdles, highlighting how AI works alongside human expertise and the tricky issue of bias in AI models. Don't miss out as he also explores the hidden gems of metadata and unconventional data in healthcare analytics, plus his take on the use of Gen AI for text analysis. Tune in for an enlightening chat.
Dr. Powell, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you on today, and we're really excited to get into this episode. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I love talking about healthcare data, the role of the CMIO. I am all yours with any questions that you want to explore.
Excellent. Yeah. And so before we jump in, just by way of background, can you give us a high-level intro on your experience and background in the healthcare industry and a little bit about your current role?
Yeah, I've been in healthcare a long time. I started off as a physical therapist, went back, became a physician, trained at Duke as an anesthesiologist. And while I was there, it was the time period where the National Institute of Health and the National Library of Medicine recognized that we needed more physicians that knew about data, knew about computers, and they offered a fellowship that I attended at Duke and got a biomedical engineering degree in medical informatics at that time period. And after that, I practiced as an anesthesiologist for a while, and having a small role as an informaticist, and that began to expand. And then I became a CMIO down in Miami, Florida, and led a Cerner install of the entire suite of tools that they do, got them stabilized, and then at University of Arkansas called, and they were doing an Epic installation. And so I became their CMIO and led them through that, and worked as a CMIO for about 10 years there at University of Arkansas. But towards the end, one of the things that we were recognizing as a big workforce shortage in both STEM, data, and informatics. And so that I was asked to start a clinical informatics master's and PhD program. And of course, you're probably aware now that there is a board certification in clinical informatics that physicians can pursue. And so we created a program around that also. Got that going. And then I have recently, I wanted to get back in the game. I got to admit that I miss hands-on, getting your hands dirty, fixing healthcare issues with good workflow analysis, good data analysis, and that's really my passion. So I took a job at Aspirus Incorporated. We are reaching out and doing healthcare for rural areas of Michigan, Wisconsin, and now Minnesota. So we're growing and extending our reach to a very large footprint over a number of different areas, which is really, as you can imagine, taxes, our health record, our data, our processes, and our workflows. So it's the right challenge for the right time right now.
Excellent. It's amazing background. And, through kind of as a data leader in the space, with all those kind of multidimensional points of industry experience, what would you say has been kind of most surprising to you along this journey?
Well, I think what has been most surprising is how slow we have adapted. So when I did my training in that National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health back in the late 90s, and of course, already by that point, the insurance industry, airline industries, all major corporations were using data in fairly sophisticated ways, and healthcare was labeled as notoriously behind. We were still using paper and storing it in warehouses and requesting it when a patient came in, and so the ability to do aggregated data analysis and have it in any way, guide your practice was really something that was happening only in a few places that had really significant resources around that. But once you went to the electronic health record, you would have thought that we would have immediately been able to leverage the data that we were getting. And what I think that surprised me is really how rough the healthcare data model is, how challenging it has been to find even as I said, I've installed most of the leading vendors of health records, and still the data quality, the data issues, the ability to use the data in a way that makes a substantial gain for the industry is still pretty challenging. And we still live in a world where the payers and the payers still are doing high level analytics with our data and knowing more about us than we know about ourselves in some situations.
Absolutely. And, as part of what we like to do here is talk about, best practices and things that you've seen really work. And so, with a lot of success with any initiative, and certainly those involving data and implementing technology, revolve around process, right? And so tell us a little bit about, kind of your strategy, some of the things you've implemented around processes that really, you look to ensure success within your data initiatives.
Yeah, I think that's really an important question. It's something that not every, I think, informaticist knows coming out of the gate, is how I tie workflow into every process around data. Because, if you look at an electronic health record, it's a combination of a database and a front-end interface. And so with your front-end interface, you're trying to help them get data into the system, but it's also that place where you can reach out to them and say, hey, I got an idea. Your data is telling us some things about what's going on, and we would like to reach out to you. So you've got to have a workflow and know where the clinician will be at different parts of their workflow around the electronic health record. And people have played for years with that. And I think, the question will be, will a computer be involved like in future healthcare and data aggregation, or will it be some kind of ambient thing that's going on? Because it is unnatural to look at that screen, especially when you're doing highly intensive workflows with your patient. It's been a concern, I think, of probably most every CMIOs that when you have somebody doing critical healthcare procedures, doing things where you would love to be able to assist in any way that you can, sometimes it's more important to simply not intervene and not disrupt their workflow, because there's a lot of issues around disrupting the cognitive flow of somebody who's really trying to think hard about something and trying to perform a highly intense task. So you're looking at the workflow for how you gather data. You're looking at the workflow for how you deliver data back to the clinician. And I'm sure it doesn't come as a surprise to most people that would watch a podcast like this, that one of the frustrating things that happened as the healthcare industry really, took on and implemented electronic health records is that the burden of payers, the burden of governmental regulators and compliance, all sort of converged at the same time, and has really made the collection of data a very complex and time-consuming thing. So I think our clinicians are spending a great deal more time gathering data that is not data that they care about. It's not the data that they're concerned with. And so I'm hoping that we get better, but I think that there's a lot of hope. One of the biggest issues with data in healthcare at this point has been the traditional way that specifically providers, I think about their clinical world. I think most, at least when I was educated, what you were taught to do is to create a narrative, right? I mean, in essence, you're building a narrative that's building a hypothesis, and then you use your skills to walk down your hypothesis of what might be causing the symptoms that this patient has, and that requires almost a word picture. And so a lot of physician language is really text based, and it's got its own structure. The story is important. And of course, if you're a data scientist, the thing that you want more than anything else is to have discrete data. You want somebody to fill out a form and put key elements and key fields in your database, so that you can then go have fun and do the things that you do to try to enhance healthcare practice. And it's been really tough to get those two ways of gathering data together. The physician workflow traditionally doesn't fit into the forms-based data collection model, and the forms and then what that creates is that the story of the patient lives in a narrative text-based set of notes in the system. And then all of the stuff that's easy to read and calculate and offer suggestions off of are in discrete fields, and you want to bring them together. The good news is, I had always said that the sort of the gold standard eventually would be when the physician could just simply tell their story, and then the machine could take it and make it discrete so that you can do what comes next with it. And we're getting closer to that. It took a long time, but there's now, there's now a number of solutions by a number of different companies that are actually getting quite sophisticated at employing voice recognition technology and AI and, some really good logical programs, and being able to take what is ambiently spoken and bringing it into data models that then can be worked on by data scientists. So I think as we start getting to that point, we're really going to be changing the face of healthcare data.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of exciting technologies coming there. And when you think about that data collection through the clinical and administrative process, it often results in a lot of defects, right? And I think that you've mentioned potentially even bringing in things like Lean Six Sigma and some other interesting approaches that I found really interesting. If you could speak a little bit about some of those kind of examples or things that you've done there.
Yeah, that sort of goes back to the concept of the workflow. So when you get more specific about it, it's really important to map the world that the clinician lives in and understand that world pretty well. When you think about an emergency room visit, right? I think that you've got a patient that walks in the door. When is the first moment that you know that patient walked in the door, and who they are and what they're there for? And there's usually this period of time where there's administrative folks putting in, demographics and some data. There's a waiting period. And at each of these periods, they can be critical periods in a healthcare plan. If you've got somebody that's coming into the hospital septic or very, very ill, a lot of harm and injury can come in the periods of time where you don't know how sick a person is. And so you can take these workflows and say, all right, let me capture the workflow in a Lean Six Sigma diagram, and then begin to build the map and say, what would be the earliest way that I could know something that could be useful in beginning to protect that this patient is not here for, a more casual issue with their health, but they're there because they're very ill and they are beginning, their health is degrading while they're sitting in your waiting room. How do you start to build those pictures? And so I've done a number of those efforts before there were more advanced tools. That's exactly how I started dealing with sepsis. Is we mapped it out and then created data points along the way that would populate a visualization and sort of say, here's a person that looks like they might be septic, and that now starts a number of timers of how fast that you start doing certain elements of their care. And when those timers start, then you can start to give feedback around the timers, right? Here's where you are in the timer. And that's where you can start to build the world of interaction where a tool, like a data tool, can become absolutely integral to the management. So I think that's what ends up happening is when you understand a workflow solidly and then understand the opportunities to collect and then deliver data around that workflow, you can actually now start thinking like you can actually be the clinician in the process and build process. So that's how I see the CMIO role. I don't know if everybody sees their role as the same thing, but I see myself as a process person, trying to create. I mean, if you look at the safety data, which in healthcare is really scary. I'm sure you're aware. Since '99, they've had reports showing that there are a lot of injuries and deaths related to being in a hospital. It's not a safe place to be, especially if you're sick. And of course, that's where you go when you're sick. And so, what are the things that you can do about it? And when they start trying to find out where the system falls down, is certainly there are times where humans make errors, but it's almost always process. I would say 80% of the time, there was a process that allowed that error, or in some situations may have even facilitated that error being made. And those are the things that you try to do, is to say, I think of process while I'm thinking of data, and realizing that what I always try to tell my folks is, I always think of it that there's a patient at the end of every one of the decisions that we make. In every one of those workflows, it's not just about getting the data, getting paid, delivering care. There's a patient at the end of that can be impacted by bad decision making.
And it seems like when you have that context of the process and you have that mapped out, one of the biggest challenges we hear is sort of in and around the EHRs is acquiring, kind of preparing data for analytics. It's really a challenge for health systems today. But I imagine kind of having that approach and going at it from a process perspective really helps, a CMIO and their team, kind of get access to the right data in a more focused and rapid way, so that, your insights are informed and, it's a little less boil the ocean as it relates to accessing data.
Yeah. And what you're bringing up then is the fact that, right, there's a couple of different layers of data that you're worried about in healthcare. At that level, I call that sort of the primary data layer. That's where the clinician is working with the patient and entering the data about a particular situation that is happening in front of them, and hopefully at that period of time, and where you can deliver, decision support and other kinds of things. Of course, nobody spent the kind of money that the U.S. spent on electronic health records just for that. It's trying to get to the aggregated data, that taking the data from all your patients and drawing them up to a level where you can start to get insights. And what's good is it's insights about things that administrators care about and payers care about and other things, but it also offers a lot of insights into how we're doing around quality and safety, right? You can actually take the data that's collected in the electronic health record and use both the data and the metadata and almost reconstruct the process and say, what is going on and where is this process seemingly falling apart, and use it for good instead of evil.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. And I think a lot of times when you think about data and just, thinking about metrics and dimensionality, it's often lost, to really model those journeys and those, whether they're administrative processes or clinical processes. I think that's really important, a thing for teams to consider as they design, their models and how they aggregate data. It's really, really good insight. And, you'd mentioned a couple other use cases about, maybe additional data, non-traditional data, even things as simple as logins and things like that might really inform interesting insights. Tell us a little bit about some of that other, underutilized data that you see in and around, within the EHR that's not just like the clinical record.
Yeah, I may have been speaking about more of the metadata.
Yeah.
So I'm sure most people, again, that would watch a podcast like this would understand the concept of metadata. But what's really fascinating is now there is a primary data collection, which would be the traditional things that that a healthcare provider would put on their paper note back in the day. Your vital signs and lab results and all the other kinds of things. But one of the things that technology allows us to do now is to collect metadata, and that's the data about the data collection itself, right? So I can tell you who did what, when, through what mechanism, how were they accessing the system, where were they at the time, what part of their workflow were they in when this piece of data was put in. And so it's often, when you get to the aggregate level, it's really the metadata that becomes very powerful, right? So, you can in essence, metadata becomes the things that you slice and dice your data around, right? So I can sit there and take a look at blood pressures across my population, but then I can take the metadata, the things like, were these on males and females? were in what age ranges were the people that had these blood pressures? What other interesting elements of that patient uh, was available to you to take a look at? Where
Yeah.
were they in your system? Are you, in essence, you can even get to the world where if you were a complex system, you could say, well, are we doing things the same way in every location? Are we having the same success or the
Mm.
same failure in every
Yeah.
location? Because you can slice and dice by those things, and that's how you start to get insights. So
Yeah. And
I think that's the biggest thing that people need to get into, is to start to model the world with the metadata. You make the metadata match your world, and then you can slice and dice your questions very easily.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that even use cases around when are the physicians logging in? Are they logging in late at night, or kind of things that suggest kind of overwork or burnout, or if someone's consistently entering data from home at night, or from kind of at the end of their day and it's going late. I mean, that can be a real kind of leading indicator of issues from just a a process and a burnout and a workload perspective. So it's really fascinating things, and I think some of the it's good to have I think awareness that that metadata and the data that's coming out of the application can be often just as or kind of even easier to wrangle to really interesting insights. So it's I really found that interesting.
Yeah, I think that's what is fascinating by the journey, is that because I think you also have to be cautious with aggregation to some extent, because
Sure.
okay, the data was being collected for a particular purpose, right? And as long as the questions that you're asking against that make sense, you can get answered. But you can imagine you could ask nonsensical questions against an original piece of data and get an answer to something that isn't really
Yeah.
useful. But yeah, the point is that we are answering questions that the original data collection was not intending to answer for people. As
Hmm.
to the point of even saying, what time of day and in what clinic. And so you've got all of these elements that you can say, if I can come up with the right question, I can actually, I can build a case to use this data in a way that actually could markedly improve something.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about AI. You touched on it a little bit. Some of the things coming down the road there with all just the focus on AI machine learning. What are you think? What use cases are you seeing in the short run that you're excited about? Kind of where could this all go? And then how do you think how should organizations, or how do you think about as an organization the key question of how do you drive incremental ROI, but mitigate risk and kind of be on the right point of the wave right as it's coming towards us here.
Right. It's really challenging. I would say AI is probably offering one of the biggest challenges that we've had in a while, because as a clinician, you want to be very cautious, right? I don't like black boxes. I don't like something that tells me what it perceives as the truth, and then I have no idea how that black box came up with that answer and whether that's helpful in any way. So what AI, I think that, and AI isn't AI. So that's the other big thing that we're dealing with now, is we've got a lot of people using that term extremely loosely. Um, and what you sometimes have is just fairly well designed algorithms that are mostly not artificial intelligence. You do have some times where you are training a model to go through your data and come up with suggestions. I would say that right now, the biggest opportunity for AI in healthcare uh, seems to be around generative AI, where basically it's an opportunity to, I think, bring context out of blocks of text, to even queue up text blobs. So what it's mostly helpful in doing is taking people that have spent a lot of their day doing text-based documentation, responses to patients, those kinds of things, and taking away some of the burden of creating those text blocks and summarizing a 10-paragraph note from a patient into what is what is the patient, really talking about? So there are some opportunities. You're going to see people using that, I think, at help desks and a lot of things. So you can actually do some generative things and begin to get the patient to interact and get part way through a question, maybe without ever having to get to a human being. It's things that, again, in other industries we've been used to for a while. That's what, again, is very interesting about this is, you can imagine, when you go and you shop on Amazon, or you make appointments in other locations to get your pet groomed. There's a lot of places out there that are actually saying, what can we do that doesn't require a human being to do this thing and still get the same quality? And I would say in healthcare, there's a lot of those opportunities. Obviously then you get cautious the more you get to where you are taking care of a patient. So that's what I think our big answers are, is what can you do with generative AI that's safe and beneficial? And then you start getting into the bigger question is, can we use more generalized or case-specific AI to actually begin to look through our world of data and begin to recognize patterns in care gaps, patterns in what's coming next, or putting something together that you hadn't put together yourself. And then what does that look like? And again, I don't think anyone wants to be in a world, for example, as a provider or a physician, spending all day answering the computer's questions, it going, hey, what about this? What about this? That's the danger of this. I think in some ways, in clinical decision support and a lot of data, we treat the clinicians like we're pumping out a bunch of people that haven't trained to be physicians or nurses or whatever like that. And the computer needs to sit on top of absolutely everything that they do. And what we've created is a world of burden, right? Where you spend half of your time interfacing with a tool instead of taking care of the patient. So I think that what we eventually have to do is to come up with you can imagine a scenario where certainly when you have a patient that's been in your system for a long period of time, and if you could train an algorithm to put pieces of data that aren't easy for humans to put together themselves, and start to say, all right, flag these things when they occur and bring them to me, and I can then decide whether we're going to act on them. There's a world where I think that will be very helpful. I think what you're going to also start to see with these things is that everyone is looking at workforce. Again, I am no expert in what happened to the workforce, but healthcare has taken a huge blow in the last few years, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how to take care of more patients with less resources. So anything that you can do to free the human up from non-productive burden and get them doing the things that bring value, I think is going to be looked at strongly.
Yeah, I think that the co-pilot type use cases, right, where you truly with generative AI now, I think finally have sophisticated enough technology to really implement those streamlining efforts where you have sort of an AI co-pilot that's taking on the administrative tasks quickly, intelligently, efficiently, where in the past it's been a little wonky with kind of more of the structured type chatbots and things like that. So I think that there's a lot of use cases we're seeing with that, just like really quick incremental wins, focusing in lower risk areas on administrative processes. I think there's a lot to be done there.
Yeah, I think that there's and I think that in some ways AI does one thing. It's putting a pressure on a system. So as I said, what I had mentioned before, healthcare in general are still not really sophisticated data users for the most part. There are exceptions to that rule, but as I said, we collect a lot of data. We collect a lot of complex data, but good data models and good modeling of systems, I think is still fairly rare. And so we keep coming out with new and better before we've actually even adopted to more simple to understand. And so it does put us in an interesting game. We're having to take on AI at a time period where it would have been nice to have stabilized our understanding of data and analytics and statistics and things like that we needed beforehand before we took on AI. I think that the computer will be making data decisions before we've ever taught a human to do it. And so what you will get is a black box if you're not careful.
Yeah, we're seeing it's kind of the same dynamic that I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago when really I think the first beautiful visual, dashboard visualization tools came out, right? And everyone was just rushing to say like, I want one of those really beautiful dashboards. And we were saying, wait a minute, like you gotta have a data foundation that you trust, that that's actually accurate, or else whatever you put on those dashboards, no matter how beautiful they are, is not really going to move the needle. And I think we're seeing the same thing with AI and machine learning. Is there's a lot of organizations, and for no fault, it's just they're trying to jump really quickly to the sophisticated AI and machine learning use cases without maybe setting that foundation on those core data sets at a minimum that they can trust, that are organized for those tools and those technologies to really be effective. And so I think that there's always a little bit of a sweet spot on making sure that you make some of the initial investments before you really go into some of those AI machine learning things. And there's some things that can be done in parallel, but I think it's something to always keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think it's always dangerous when you come up with these seemingly unreachable terms, like artificial intelligence. I think does something to the brains of people. The average person who runs a hospital or does something like that doesn't have any idea what artificial intelligence actually is and how dangerous it is or is not, and how it gets done. And I think the good news, one of the good outcomes of the recent sort of explosion with Google and their AI model and things like that is the fact that you realize that humans still, even in artificial intelligence, humans are still a huge portion of training the model how to function.
Yeah.
And so all of the bias and flaws of human thinking can be built into an AI model. So that's the danger is we don't the Terminator just doesn't show up on your doorstep and start figuring out all your problems. You've got, there's a lot of thinking that has to be done. And I just, as a clinician, I think a clinician tends to be a little more on the cautious side, because again, there's a patient at the other end of that decision. So whatever that black box is putting out, I want some proof that it's useful, relevant, and safe before I stop being the barrier between that getting to the patient.
Right. And throughout your career, you spent a lot of time in clinical informatics, and you'd mentioned building master's and PhD programs, and kind of from there to the real world of enterprise implementations. How do you think we're doing as an industry, kind of educating and producing the talent that we need in these critical areas to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that what is fascinating is the big explosion that is occurring around technology and data is happening in a very strange way. So just to give you some basics is, I believe the last calculation I'd read within the last few years is we're putting out in the United States, less than 15% of our college graduates are graduating in what we would term STEM fields, with a decent understanding of math and science and data and technology, which is not going to be enough, right? That's not enough humanity in these key areas to do a lot of what we need. And so we are also, so we're and then we are retiring out. The baby boomers are retiring, and the baby boomers had a much significantly higher rate of STEM education. So we are truly, as a country, but this is actually international. We're beginning to see this as an international trend. We are losing STEM at the time period where the people that are in STEM are blowing up the world, right? I mean, think about what's happening in Silicon Valley and all these other places. So that's the first part, is that the talent just in the field is not there. It's hard to find data scientists, if not impossible. And that is, right now, if you're a report writer, I think a lot of people in healthcare think that you do magic, right? Just being able to produce good quality reports out of it. Doing true analytics is really, something reserved. As I said, There are a lot of industries that put a lot of money. I think maybe that's the point that I'm trying to get at. It's really an investment. It's an investment that hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm.
We've invested in the tool to collect the data. So I would say now it's impossible to walk into a successful hospital or hospital system and not have it be substantially drenched with technology, with data technology. Whether we're leveraging all of those tools, I think, is really the key issue. And my question would be, how can you leverage it when you don't have any data scientists there to do something with? So either we have to create a world where we can do the data science in the computer, again, creating the black box again, but you actually can get your insights and bring them into a presentable manner to people who don't inherently have that skill set themselves. Or we have to begin to think about training people within organizations as good users of data. And either of those scenarios takes money and time and effort. So how are we doing? We're not, I think specifically in healthcare, it's really challenging to get good data that is meaningful, because we usually are understaffed, and the work, we're usually understaffed because the investment hasn't been made in it. And when you do decide to use data in a sophisticated way, now you're out competing with every other industry in the world to get those resources.
Yeah, and I think there's some, going back to the AI opportunities. I think there's definitely some opportunities within AI, and a lot of the initial disruption is going to be ironically within the engineering and technology space. Right, there's so much that can be done right now with again, that kind of co-pilot use case on data discovery, and kind of being able to fill in the even some of the subject matter expertise gaps that we see for technologists entering into the field of healthcare. I can tell for myself, I mean, 15 years ago I came in as a Silicon Valley engineer into healthcare, thinking like, how hard can this be, right? And it was really quick where a lot of people end up just kind of putting their hands up and saying, I'm going back to something that's a little bit makes more sense. But I think that there's the industry is obviously big enough. The problem is big enough that you're seeing a lot of really great technologists dig in, stay focused on healthcare. So I think it's a really exciting time, but the shortage is absolutely there, and something we need to really keep our eye on as we think about making sure that healthcare organizations have access to the talent that they need, both clinically and on the technology side.
Well, I'll give you one tidbit too, that I think it's very strange how the Silicon Valleys and other entrepreneurs have gone about developing tools for healthcare. Because I think that it was bad investments up front. When I first became a CMIO, I remember reading, I think it was 85 to 90% of all startups in healthcare IT failed within a year. And I think that that's not uncommon. I've heard that about starting restaurants and things like that too. But you would talk to these people, and they didn't have a physician or an informaticist or somebody. It was a bunch of people behind a computer trying to decide what they could do around healthcare. And I think we still have some of that. I would say, if there was more collaboration in, let's be really creative, getting the right set of physicians and nurses to design what will be helpful, right? Because what I was noticing is that you'd have a great idea that didn't fit into any workflow, right? You're like, wow, you're doing a lot of sophisticated calculations and a lot of interesting use of data, and it will never in the world translate to what we do over here, because it was unplugged from the practicing clinician. So I think that that's the thing too, is that I think the collaborations and investment around this, again, let's get in there, get our hands dirty, and figure out what is the ways that we can take a system and make it better that's actually useful for everybody.
And I think as we talk, I mean, a lot of this show, we really focus on kind of data's role in the transition to value-based care. And I think that that's a really important element in terms of, technologists or, entrepreneurs that are looking to come in and help move that industry towards that, that transition or that goal, is being in the workflows, being in, working with the thought leaders. And a lot of the purpose of bringing, everyone together on this in this series is to really get some of the, brightest minds to share these, really insightful things and understand the nuances of value-based contracting versus fee-for-service. And it's really unique. And sometimes how the data is prepared and the data elements that you need, things change. And I think it's really important, like you mentioned, to be really deeply collaborative with the health systems and others to make sure that the technology is being applied to a business problem versus just, trying to use technology first and, solve a business problem second. So it's a really important one. And I think it's critical in the speed at which we will achieve some of those goals around, value-based care and other really important initiatives in the industry.
Well, while
Yeah.
you're there, I love that you bringing up value-based care, because it touches on a couple of things. I'll say something controversial and you can edit it out if it's too controversial. But this is that example where we transformed the entire payment model in healthcare. And it's not a payment model by itself. When you think about it, it takes a whole new structure for nursing in care management. It takes a whole new structure for primary care in managing populations. It takes a whole new. We didn't do any of the upfront work, and then we walked into rooms as healthcare organizations, into rooms filled with payers who had masters and PhD data scientists sitting there with the ability to do amazing risk stratification and understanding the world that they're getting into. And then we are signing contracts with these people. And what you're seeing is lately, especially in the Midwest, is a lot of these people that are doing value-based care are going out of business. We're losing a lot of good hospital systems because that model hasn't been working as anticipated, I think, for some people. And so there are people that are clinging on to various amounts of fee-for-service kind of reimbursement. But it is really an interesting world right now where I think that I'm going to guess, knowing the fact that, it was a David and Goliath story, that, as I said, I've been in payers' offices and you just salivating over the talent that they have sitting around the table in data. And until we get that sophisticated, it's really, you need to be sitting at the table, because it would have told you how you can be successful, how you can get the same insights that your payers got into how to risk stratify and decide whether you're going to take on a particular contract, right? There are loser contracts that can happen where it's a money loser, and you would know it were you able to do the right analytics around it up front. And so I would say that those are the skills, but then you would have to realize that the whole workflow, that was the biggest thing that I was originally going to comment on in this controversial statement, is that we not only went in unarmed, we showed up to a gunfight unarmed. We didn't have any idea the largeness of taking on care management and taking on population risk, because you could have even said, did we have the right conversations to whether that's really what a hospital should be doing? I'm not pushing back on it, but I don't even recall that conversation happening. I recall basically we're heading there, and now you're doing it, and now you're being paid in a particular way, so now you got to do something about it. And that's how we sort of got into this, the tail wagging the dog. But I would say that there's a lot of, if you look around at the health of the healthcare industry right now, there are a lot of systems that are struggling to have any significant margin.
And in terms of arming the provider with the insights that they need to be productive in those conversations, have you seen anything that you've used or that's out there that you found successful and that you can share?
Well, yeah, I would say that probably all sophisticated electronic health records, and then of course there's a lot of players around building out the concept of registries and building out the concept of care management tools. At the core, we haven't gotten to a point where there isn't a significant human need, right? When you talk about, but with care management, in essence, the way you look at it is you use the data to build a population, for example, a population of people that have diabetes. And then
Yeah.
you design out the key elements of what are the things around diabetes that are key things that you want to make sure that you measure at appropriate intervals and keep within particular ranges and those kinds of things. And you build out, again, it's building out the model, and then you have someone sit on top of the model and flag it when somebody
Yeah.
falls off so it's really, that's the most those. And when you think about it, that's really not sophisticated tools, right? That's just using your data the way you could use data. It's building the model of your population and deciding what you want to do to your population. I think as there are people beginning to get to risk stratification tools and using, again, AI and some good algorithmic thinking to begin to predict. That's what the payer did. They already have an idea about what your risk is for having an MI by the time that you're 60 years old. We don't have that information, right? And we're the ones that would have to take care of you. So we've got to get to the world where we're not just measuring it for payment, we're measuring it to begin to early intervene and predict when things are going wrong long before it's obvious to the human observer.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great. And, we looked, a lot of this is, kind of just thought leadership and bringing things together. So, as we look to kind of foster this collective mind share, what are some of the top sources that you go for that you're drawing intelligence from? So whether it's, news or books or podcasts, or like, where do you go to get, information you think is valuable and kind of staying up to date on a lot of these topics?
Yeah, I mean, that is really a good question. I do spend, I do have a set of sort of key, query terms that I keep in my back pocket and hit things like JAMIA, the American Medical Informatics Association. They still produce a lot of articles. It's really a lot of it's really, but weirdly enough, though, it's in the medical journals that you're finding some of the keys where you don't have an informaticist, for instance, doing more academic kinds of looks at things. You're actually having clinicians say, "Hey, we solved a real world clinical problem that's important to us using some of these tools." So that, yes, I certainly look at JAMA and New England Journal of Medicine and a lot of the the peer reviewed publications to look for informatics related articles. How are people solving their problem? In both of the electronic health record vendors that I have implemented, what's really fun about that is they've each developed a community too also. So they produce community tools where you can actually reach out, for example, to another place that's doing something that you haven't done yet, you want to do, someone else has solved that problem. And you can actually reach out and say, "Hey, how did you solve this? And what should we be looking at? What data did you use? And how did you build your model?" So there are those very practical, real world things that you can do is get involved with your electronic health record community. There are people in LinkedIn every day trying to pump out podcasts and pump out, information. So I think that I keep an eye on it all, but it's really hard. It's really hard to get to the quality. Yeah. I like your question because I hadn't really thought about how challenging it is to really focus on one area and say, this is where all the good new thinking is coming to. It's really spread out.
There's a lot of noise, definitely, and so it's always good. That's really helpful. Definitely going to add some of those things to the list and start to get deeper. I like the medical journal stuff. That's interesting because I think I also look a lot within sort of I would say technology slanted research, but I think some of those things like going a little bit more generically could be interesting to help connect some of those dots that maybe aren't right there on the surface. So that's awesome. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that I didn't ask that you wanted to talk about today?
Actually, I thought it was a really good conversation. I'm pretty good stopping.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you so much again. This was fantastic. I had a great time. I really appreciate our time as always. Whenever we get a chance to have a discussion, so thanks again for being on, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.